You know, when a war for independence is fought, the battles don't just happen on the ground. They also rage on the printed page. Today, we're going to dive into the Algerian War of Independence, but not through the eyes of soldiers. Instead, we're going to look at it through the words of one of the world's most influential newspapers to see how language itself can become a weapon.
So, let's kick things off with the big question that's going to guide us through this whole thing. Is the news a simple mirror, just showing us what's happening, or is it more like a lens, carefully focusing, magnifying, and maybe even distorting our view of reality? Hang on to that question because we're about to dig into the evidence.
All right, first up, a super quick recap of the timeline so we're all on the same page. We are talking about a brutal 8-year conflict. It all starts in 1954 when Algeria's National Liberation Front, the FLN, launches a wave of attacks. The war gets bigger, it actually brings Charles de Gaulle back to power in France in '58, and it finally wraps up with Algerian independence in 1962. So this is the stage for our investigation.
And who's our subject of investigation? Well, it's the Times of London. I mean, we're talking about a real heavy hitter, a titan of journalism, respected all over the world. We're putting its coverage from that whole period, 1954 to 1962, right under the microscope to see exactly how it told the story of this war. What picture was it painting for its readers?
So how in the world do you do that? How do you analyze a newspaper's words? Well, you need the right tools. We're going to use a specific method here that lets us, decode the news, to look past the surface and find the hidden meanings that are baked right into the text.
And that tool is called Critical Discourse Analysis, or CDA. Now, I know it sounds super academic, right? But the idea is actually really simple. Think of it like being a detective for words. It's a way of looking at language to see how it reveals and even reinforces the hidden beliefs and power structures in a society. It helps us find the fingerprints of ideology all over the headlines.
Okay, so here's how we're going to do it in 3 simple steps. First, we're going to look at the text itself, the nitty-gritty of word choice and how sentences are built. Second, we have to understand the context, like who's writing this stuff and who are they writing it for. And third, we connect that language to the bigger picture to see how it plugs into the power dynamics of the time. So let's put this toolkit to work.
All right, our investigation starts with the most direct evidence we have, the words themselves. The specific vocabulary a newspaper chooses can tell you, well, it can tell you a whole lot. Let's look at our first set of clues.
Wow. Okay, just look at this. The contrast in the language used for the two sides it's just black and white. The Algerian FLN siders, they get hit with all these negative criminal words, rebels, terrorists, gangs. They even use the word felaga, which literally translates to bandits. But the French military? Totally different story. They're described with these neutral, professional, legitimate terms. Forces, soldiers, security forces. The message couldn't be clearer. One side is a criminal gang, the other is a proper army.
And that pattern just keeps going when we look at how the conflict itself was described. The actions of the Algerians are all framed as illegal or chaotic, rebellion, uprising, even straight-up terrorism. But the French actions? Oh, that was just defense. They were simply trying to maintain the status quo. This language isn't just describing what happened, it's telling you what to think about it.
And check this out, a perfect example of how victimhood can be framed. This is a real sentence from the Times. 7 persons were killed and more than 40 injured, mostly civilians and many of them Europeans. Did you catch that? They make a point to specifically highlight the European victims. This creates a kind of hierarchy of suffering, and it subtly guides your sympathy toward one group over the other.
The clues can get even sneakier, though. The paper loved using the passive voice. A phrase like, was believed to be in the hands of the terrorists. That is very clever. Who believed it? The French government? One guy? The paper itself? We don't know. By leaving that part out, it makes the statement sound like a widely accepted, objective fact, guiding your opinion without ever showing its hand.
But here's the thing. It's not just about what's in the newspaper. It's also about what's missing. Sometimes the most powerful clue you can find is in the silence, in what a newspaper chooses not to talk about.
This is just staggering. Over the entire 8-year war, in all the articles that were analyzed, how many times do you think the Times used the word colonization to describe the actual root cause of the conflict? Take a guess. The answer is 1, a single time. The entire historical context of the war was pretty much erased from the conversation.
So if they weren't saying colonization, what were they saying? Well, the paper consistently used this much softer, way more neutral phrase, European settlements. Now, that completely reframes the entire situation, doesn't it? It shifts the story from a fight against a colonial power to a conflict where some innocent civilians are just under threat.
And look at this. Look at who got a voice. This table shows how many times key people were mentioned. The French leader, Charles de Gaulle, over 1,300 mentions. But the key Algerian leaders, they're practically footnotes in their own story. Farhad Abbas, the first president of the provisional government, gets 153 mentions. Ben Bella, Algeria's first president, only 91. And Mustafa Ben Boulaid, a founding father of the revolution, just 2 mentions. This isn't just a small difference, it's a total silencing.
And this might be the most shocking one of all. The incredibly influential anti-colonial thinker Frantz Fanon, an absolute intellectual giant of the movement and an FLN member, was never mentioned. Not a single time. His powerful ideas on decolonization, which were literally changing the world at that moment, were completely scrubbed from the story being told to readers of the Times.
So let's put all these clues together. We have the biased words, the strategic silences. What does it all add up to? What's the final verdict on the story the Times was building?
Well, it follows this classic ideological playbook, something the theorist Toon Van Dyke calls the us versus them strategy. It's simple, really. You constantly play up the negative things about them, the Algerians. You downplay or just ignore their positives, like their reasons for fighting for freedom. And at the same time, you emphasize the positives of us, the French defending order, while you sweep their negatives, like the brutal reality of colonial rule, under the rug.
And this quote from Van Dyke just nails it. He argued, the important element is what is not said in news text rather than what is said. The real story is often hidden between the lines, and it's up to us, as critical readers, to go looking for it.
So let's be really clear about the conclusion here. Through its choice of words, its framing of events, and what it chose to leave out, the coverage in the Times was not a neutral mirror on reality. Not at all. It was an active lens that consistently worked to delegitimize the Algerian fight for independence and to reinforce the colonial power dynamic that was already in place.
And that brings us back to that first question, but now it's for you. The next time you're reading the news, scrolling through your feed, ask yourself, whose story is being told here? Whose voice is being turned up, and whose is being turned down or even silenced completely? Because understanding the war over words is every bit as important as understanding the war on the ground.